Hello, everybody. Welcome to the September 17th Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee meeting of the Vermont Climate Council. Before most people got on, Marion and I were agreeing that we're glad it's Friday and that this has been a long week because there's been a ton of not only Climate Council items going on, but a lot of other stuff going on, but a lot of Climate Council stuff going on. And next week's going to be the same. So it's great to see all of you. Catherine is going to be joining us in a few minutes. She had to chase down her old dog, so that took a wrong turn on a lunchtime walk. So she'll be here in a few minutes. Why don't we go over what?
It's a metaphor for life. Chasing down an old dog who took a bad turn.
I'm just like, where's my wrong turn? God darn it. So why don't we go over the agenda real quick? We will start off with an update on the stakeholder engagement event, just a recap how that went. And then we'll be hearing from Jane on some guidance from the Climate Council meeting that was held earlier this week. Then we'll be spending some time in the spreadsheet that Marianne sent out that consolidated all of the strategies and actions as revised. Given some of our input from last week, we'll be wanting to look through those in detail, make sure there isn't anything missing based on what we saw in our stakeholder engagement, as well as other areas, including guidance from council, and then talking about next steps. And then we will close with some public comment. Of course, just a reminder that we do welcome public comment throughout the meeting, so you don't have to hold your questions or comments until the end. Okay, are there any proposed changes to the agenda? And I'll also take a look at the minutes that are linked in the agenda. All right, so let's move right into it. How did everybody think the stakeholder engagement event went last night? Wednesday night?
I thought it was great, just to break the ice.
I thought it was great too. I thought it was really well put together. My subgroup was a little bit quieter, but it sounded like some of the other subgroups were more vocal, which is a good thing.
Yeah,
James?
I would say, yeah, great job, Erica, in sort of, overseeing the entire event. I think we got some really good feedback in our focus group, and sounds like when we all connected at the end of the event, that seemed to be the case across the, whatever it was, 4 or 5 groups. So be really interesting. Is somebody going to collate kind of all of those responses and, I guess just sort of, summarize what we heard. Yeah. So nice job.
I definitely don't want to take credit for that event because Catherine and Marion, they were the planners for that event. They just said, here, come up with a paragraph to introduce us. And that's the thing I do.
Yeoman's work, Marion. And
they really were the brains and the brains and the brawn behind putting that whole engagement session together.
Yep.
I had a conflict and missed it, but I'd love to, see the summary or if there's when it comes out. Thanks.
Yeah, my assumption.
I could have started with this. So yes, there will be a summary. There were note takers in every one of the breakout rooms, and the note takers have sent their notes to Catherine Morris with CBI, who will be compiling those into a summary of the feedback. I'm hoping grouped by themes to then share back with the subcommittee. We don't have a quick synopsis to share today. I didn't have time to put that together, and Catherine did not send me something to show. But I am hoping we'll have that next week for the subcommittee meeting next week, Friday. I do think it'd be great to just hear folks who are in either facilitators who are in the breakout rooms, maybe summarizing some of the key takeaways or things that you think were important, especially as we're going to talk a bit about the actions in the spreadsheet and anything we want to finalize before posting that for the Climate Council to review next week. And so to note, if there was anything in your groups that you thought maybe was a gap is something that we need to think about, and then we can finesse that once we get the feedback next week. But I thought it went fantastic. Thanks to everybody that helped out with the facilitating and the note taking. I know it was a bit of a crunch time at the end to find folks, but I thought it went really well. And we will have a detailed summary of that. We just don't have it yet because it only happened 2 days ago.
Jens.
I just want to echo the praise for Marion and Catherine. It went very, very well, very smoothly, very well executed. I facilitated one of the small groups and we had a great discussion. I heard very little that wasn't already in our strategies, actions, pathways, etc. The one thing that I did hear that I'll flag that was a little step beyond what I've seen in our pathways was marketing for volunteers in terms of adding capacity at the municipal level, the need to find additional ways of, and we've known this for years, of finding additional ways to get more people to volunteer. But that concept of taking it even to the realm of marketing was something that I hadn't heard before. And one of the participants that had brought that up spoke about the local fire department and why are they so successful at getting volunteers? And we all agreed that perhaps this work wasn't as sexy as putting out a fire, but still the local fire department is very good at that in this person's town. And so that idea of marketing is the one thing that I'd heard that I haven't seen in our strategies.
Which town is that? Because in the vast majority of the towns, they can't find people to volunteer for the fire service.
Yeah, it's certainly hit or miss on the what fire departments are robust, just like it is at the municipal level, what towns are really cranking.
So yeah, that was it was kind of a similar sentiment that, in terms of like the people that are involved on energy committees and things like that are the people that are already like really passionate about that. But if you're in a town that has pretty limited resources and you don't have that impassioned person that can give a little bit of time or a lot of time, depending on what the issue is, then you're kind of at a disadvantage. Ben?
Yes, hello. I was in Joe Segali's group. He did a great job. I thought it was a good discussion. I saw some old friends. We had lively discussion in the chat. All good. That said, and at the risk of stating the obvious, we're in a little bit of an echo chamber. The people who showed up are people who are into this stuff, and there's a lot of agreement going on. And we still have a problem in terms of who we're not talking to and not hearing from and engaging with folks who don't necessarily drink this Kool-Aid.
Marion, is that an old hand?
Oh, it's a new hand.
Okay.
Yeah, I hear you, Ben. And I think any suggestions you have on how to reach those new folks or those folks that we aren't typically engaged with would be helpful. I think, with this event, it was pulled together fairly quickly. So we used the sort of networks for communications that we have available to us, many of which are reaching those same folks that we typically hear from. To Jane's point in the chat, we do have 4 public engagement events next week that are trying to reach that broader audience, going to in-person locations, held outdoors, but trying to reach communities to pull in those folks. It won't be as targeted of a conversation as we had on Wednesday night, particularly around rural community capacity issues. It's going to be broader around climate change impacts to individuals and households and how they feel those. But I think that is the intent of those events. And then we have 3 additional online events the week after. So certainly continuing to do that outreach, but I hear you on sort of the echo chamber and needing to expand that reach. I did just want to follow up on also in my group, and we know we do have some time on the agenda to kind of talk about these takeaways, and I think it's good to have these front of mind as we dive into the spreadsheet today. But following up on Jens's point, there was a lot of discussion in my group around community sort of community capital and, volunteer networks, especially for response and recovery after a disaster, which I know is something we have talked a lot about in the subcommittee. But in going through our pathways and strategies and actions and the spreadsheet I sent you all today, I think we could do a better job highlighting those. So just want to flag that for conversation today.
Yeah, I do have a proposed action language right here along those lines, so we can talk about that when we get into that. I'm not sure if it's specific to disaster response recovery or if it's all volunteerism. I think we probably have to kind of narrow the scope, but we can talk about it a little bit more. Any other feedback from the engagement sessions? Mike?
It's easier to do that than the electronic one. Just the one thing, and I know Marion will remember this too, that we kind of stumbled on in our group was one of the people that joined the meeting was talking about how we need to electrify because there's no more grocery stores, there's no more clothing stores, there's no more this and that in all these rural communities. And so everyone's driving a half hour to get everywhere. And we kind of stumbled on, well, what have we talked about? You have all these revitalization districts that are trying to, revitalize downtowns and things like that. And we're just curious if we even need to put something into the minds of the people that are doing that to incent grocery stores, incent clothing stores, even if it's a general store, as a way to cut down on greenhouse gases, where all these little villages that used to have these stores locally, and now they have to travel a half hour. Even where I grew up in Bells Falls, Vermont, there's no longer a clothing store or a grocery store. You have to drive somewhere to get that. And when I grew up, it had everything. So just a thought that as a reduction, GHG reduction thought, we should probably not miss out on that.
Yeah, if I could, just to follow on with what Mike is saying, I heard the same concerning stories in the group that I was in. Actually, Mike, using Bellows Falls as an example, a member of that community spoke to the fact that the downtown, the village center, is essentially dead. And so it really kind of gave me pause, it's here in Burlington, it's easier to ride a bike, hop on the bus than it is to drive down Pine Street. So it's like, it's happening, but we've got a critical mass here. We've got the public transportation pretty well dialed. So, how we address the smart growth kind of implications, what we're talking about in rural Vermont is going to be critical. And I'm a little nervous about it, quite frankly, because of the way land use has changed over the last, 20, 30 years. And, the advent of the box store and, we knew this was going to be an issue, and here it is. So I think there's got to be a decent amount of focus on the smart growth elements of what we're talking about here, especially for rural communities. And I don't know what the answer is, but it definitely gave me pause.
If I could add, we do have success stories all over the state of, communities that have lost their village store. They've worked hard to bring it back. But it's hard. There are some big market forces and global forces at play that are changing the economics and the vitality of these centers. But there's examples all over the state of communities that said, this is important to us. We're going to make it happen. And they've reopened stores that have been shuttered for years. But it doesn't happen by itself. And it does need a lot of support and effort to kind of create these opportunities and to revive these centers. Without a store, without a school, without these kind of common links holding a community together, it gets harder. And decline didn't happen quickly, and it's hard to make it come back as quickly as you want it to. So, but we do have tools that are successful, and they have made some progress. But more resources obviously would help more of these communities create more walkable centers where you had places to shop locally and didn't have to drive an hour, 2 hours to get what you need.
Just to add on to what Chris said, there are success stories because we just recently saw the reopening of a new general store in the village of Albany. Really was really small community. Hardwick, there was an interest in closing their grocery store there, and another group stepped in to buy it. Same thing in the village of Glover. So groups like the Preservation Trust of Vermont and our Village Center designation program, those are helpful tools and groups to work with. So.
Yeah, in my town, East Callis, village store closed, big group coming to, it should be open next year. So, but people need to care.
One more thing to add, there was another person that talked about I think it was the Albany store, David, that you mentioned. And she also said that everyone has to be open-minded and open-minded to listen to everybody. And what that made me think too is like Heinsberg, for instance, they still have a store. It's not locally owned, but they have a store. And to me, I wonder if sometimes if we worry so much about who owns it or things like that, that's not really the point. The point is having one. So a little pitch to have some open minds on how we get there too. Thanks.
And we saw that when the Dollar Generals were being proposed in some of our communities. Some people are not in favor of those types of stores, while others say we need them. So.
Chris Campany?
Yeah, so imagine what if you know Bellows Falls, imagine what Bellows Falls would have been like without the massive investment that the community has made in their community. It would be quite the hellscape, and it's dead. I don't know what they meant by it's dead, but actually the nightlife probably ain't great, but it's not as far from dead. And Lisé's Market is still open. They still have a grocery store in Bellows Falls. It may not be a Hannaford or a Shaw's, but it's still a market. So, but I think part of the issue that we're facing is we need an influx of working age people, especially out in the rural areas. And one of the challenges with that, fundamental challenges now that's worse than I've seen it since I've been here, is there's nowhere to live. And so we're even at the point now, even if you want to hire somebody to come into the state who is working age with their family, they can't live here. They're having to live out of state, commuting in from Massachusetts. So to get there, there's a lot of, frankly, infrastructure work that needs to be done. And I hope, I've brought this up 1,000 times, I'm going to bring it up again. We've got to talk about how to actually make infrastructure investment and other things happen. I don't think, I'm wearing my municipal interest hat now, we can just punt to towns every time and say, good luck with this. Here's the Hunger Games of grants, go out and get them, and figure out how to do this. We've got to come in, like we did on the Clean Water Initiative, more of an all-in approach. It's in every Vermonter's interest to fund the infrastructure necessary to support the compact settlement, to create the conditions to where building new homes at scale is even possible. And then also with climate adaptation resilience, as we develop these compact centers, doing so in a way that doesn't put people in harm's way, which requires like the actual physical master planning, not just language in a town plan. And so I hope this group is going to be looking at, the real details, and I'm happy to contribute to it, to actually make stuff happen. But we can't just keep saying town planning commissions will figure this out. We'll add more ornaments to the cherry tree, the Christmas tree. That's chapter 117 with town plan requirements, because towns don't have to do plans, and they're on an 8-year cycle, and it's volunteers doing it. So we kind of need to revisit our assumptions around all of this stuff. So I'll get off my soapbox, but I really do hope we'll get into the details about like how to actually move the needle forward, not just kind of revisiting the existing structures we have now, because it's not going to work.
Those are all really good points, Chris. I just want to, I think that's actually a good segue into our strategies and actions discussion in the spreadsheet, but I just want to be sure there's not more input that folks want to provide on takeaways from the engagement session. And actually, we're not going into the spreadsheet. We're actually going to hear from Jane on some guidance from the Climate Council. So why don't we move into that? Thanks. I caught her like when she's chewing. It's always best.
Oh, no, sorry, I had like 10 windows open to get back to you guys. I was careful. I did get caught in science and data putting peanut butter in my mouth, and now hours later, I'm still eating peanut butter, so probably should stop at some point. Okay, so thank you for giving a few minutes, and I'll start, and Marion is welcome to join in too. The Climate Council had two substantive issues on Tuesday related to feedback that will ultimately need to be clarified for subcommittees, and that speaks to the Climate Action Plan drafting and roles and responsibilities at the subcommittee level and staff and counselor level. And then secondly, we discussed prioritization, which is not quite finalized, but I'd like to just give you an update on and think through the timing of. So first, the Climate Action Plan drafting. There had been a lot of discussion around responsibilities, roles, process for Climate Action Plan drafting, and we put forward on Tuesday a timeline and a CAP outline that assigned responsibilities, largely with substantive policy level components staying with subcommittees where the expertise relies, but also ensuring that there were key state staff to support the writing and roll-up where counselors and or subcommittee members didn't have capacity to take it further than they have. So I have a detailed outline that speaks to that. Happy to share it now if there's time, to walk through that, but also the way I've been dealing with it with some of the other subcommittees is completing a follow-up email to all of you with the detailed CAP outline attached and highlighting the key milestones in the coming weeks. First and foremost for you all is the presentation of your actions at the September 28th Climate Council meeting, recognizing that ideally we would circulate those in a comprehensive nature a week ahead of time, so next Tuesday, the 21st. So happy to share the CAP outline. One of the things that was left unresolved, and I know probably Chris Cochran is like turning inside that we still don't have like the best process for dealing with cross-cutting ideas and framework for implementation. But the intent was to ask and recognize that while those are the sort of key synthesis components of the Climate Action Plan, that Marion and I, with support of state staff, shouldn't be working and then providing drafts, that we should really have integration with counselors from the onset to ensure buy-in at the end with the council around those really critical components of the Climate Action Plan. So we asked the Climate Council to, and I should say counselors specifically, to step forward by the end of today to suggest if they had time to support that component of the work, which would deal with one, how and what themes and ideas we elevate as cross-cutting themes in the Climate Action Plan, think about how we accurately reflect that in the Climate Action Plan, and then also think about how we develop and write the implementation section of the Climate Action Plan. Hopefully that the respective counselors who would lean into that work would represent the varying backgrounds that we need to address all of the climate policies within the CAP, namely resilience, adaptation, sequestration, and mitigation, that the counselors wouldn't just be the mitigation folks or just the resilience folks, but it would be have a diverse background. The steering committee will hear who those counselors are that have stepped forward on Tuesday, and hopefully we'll be able to move forward and start to really integrate them into the process of drafting. Hopefully we didn't terrify and scare counselors off, one, by the dysfunctionality of the CAP drafting work to date with the support of counselors that tried to stand up a process and then that got squashed for various reasons. And two, with the amount of time that we expect it to take. Just I was very hesitant, Mary and I were, about putting out expectations for time, but at the same time, recognizing that the next 2 months is going to be all consuming. I didn't also want to say, oh, it'd just be an hour-long conversation every week. And so we did put the expectation out that it could be around 8 hours a week for a counselor to lean into that process. So that was number one. And number 2 was prioritization. And we had a really, I thought, robust conversation that felt like we made really good headway on how we're going to prioritize all the actions for the climate action plan, and where we're going to be doing that, at what level we'll be doing that prioritization at. And since then, I will say that it's also been informed by, we have a consultant who, like, hopefully by the end of today, I think I've been saying this for a couple of days, so we'll have an executed contract for the equity component of the prioritization. And I've set up a meeting with the co-chairs of the 5 subcommittees and the equity consultant for next Wednesday to iron out the process of support for subcommittees for applying the scoring rubric to your work. And so hopefully that will be much clearer, so we can have interaction with them around their thinking about how they'll support your work. And what that's led to, that my conversations with that, the consultants this week, as well as the comments at the council meeting, is starting to have Marion and I think about a stepwise prioritization process, recognizing now that the consensus at the council was to review all actions in a prioritization framework. There was some homework to be done around the criteria with science and data informing how we define 2 of the criteria out of the 5 that we propose to use for review and ranking, which is those 5 being impact, progress towards the GWSA requirements or goals, which is what we're defining as impact, cost effectiveness, co-benefit, equity, and feasibility. And feasibility was narrowly defined at first as technical feasibility, and there was some pushback on how that could be defined using existing definitions, such as the one from the IPCC. Science and data looked at that this morning, as did, they also are thinking about cost effectiveness, and that is a specific requirement of the GWSA, that the ideas and recommendations put forward would be cost effective. But what cost effective means is left to the council to define. And so where science and data got today was a very narrow definition of feasibility, restricted to technical is what they'd like, but a very broad definition of cost effective to consider cost effective to who, cost of inaction. And so there's a process set forward to refine that more closely. All of this to say that for next week, right now, the consensus should be around a comprehensive list of actions to put forward to the council and consideration of how you want to present that. But I expect that after Tuesday's steering committee meeting, as well as the meeting with the equity consultant on Wednesday next week, we should be able to walk through very detailed a timeline and application of the prioritization framework, as well as when the equity screening will occur with the consultant and what's expected at the subcommittee. So as I keep saying to everybody, thanks for sticking with us as we're building the process as we go. And I'm sorry that we don't have more clarity right this moment, but I do feel like we're getting there. Marion, feel free to add anything if I missed anything, or anybody have any questions.
Nothing to add, but Pat and Catherine and Eric and I met earlier this week to talk a little bit about that, understanding that we were going to get some additional clarity today. And Pat, I think, has worked on that drafting timeline with specific components for rural resilience and adaptation that he can project and we could walk through with folks. And then I think Catherine and Erica, I'll leave this to you to talk about, but we may want to walk through it and start actually seeing if there are members of the subcommittee or staff support who would be interested in helping draft certain sections of the plan. And we can talk about what we think that may look like in terms of how much writing in relation to the timeline. So
Great.
Pat, do you want to project, and then we can walk through that and then think about drafting. We don't have to decide it all today, but I think understanding that there are some folks who don't have any capacity and some folks who have some capacity, it'd be helpful to at least know where that is, so that Jane and I can work on sort of addressing the gaps that may be needed to help fill out this section, the rural resilience sections of the plan.
So what I put in red is that essentially all the subcommittees work, and then all the black stuff is the Climate Council. But here's the kind of the key message. So obviously next week, probably the key thing, assuming your matrix is on its way, is just to kind of review the slideshow that the council members would present on your behalf from the subcommittee to the council. So that'll be kind of next week's agenda. If we have anything more on equity or screening, great. Then the thought is starting October 1, you're meeting then, you really have two weeks, about half of October, to plow through the matrix and your actions and strategies vis-a-vis the prioritization and the equity analysis that's being suggested. So that's a fair amount of work. And the reason being, roughly by the 15th, or maybe even a little bit before, the folks from your group who you're going to select to help draft your sections of the report need to begin to start drafting, and you'll need to start reviewing sections of the report. But it's harder to do that until they actually have your priorities done right through the evaluation. So kind of the first half of the month is finishing up the matrix, evaluating it, using the equity screen. The last part of the month is really getting to, going back and forth with you all and your writers to kind of get the chapters relevant to you all, in decent shape. And then really, you've got to get those chapters, I think, available, if I have this right, and Miriam J, correct me, kind of towards October 22nd, in order to make sure that the Climate Council has it before the 2nd to actually review. So there's a lot of pretty fast, hard work in October to get done. Jane and Miriam, add anything I got wrong or needs to be changed or whatever.
No, this is really helpful, and thanks to Marion and you for having taking the initiative to put this out there for everybody. So and the CAP outline itself and its components. Marion and I we're starting to talk about expectations around like language and drafting, and so we've started to really think about that the pathways themselves will be where you have like a paragraph written with respect to the strategies. Again, we're really targeting being somewhat short and sweet, with the strategies being a sentence or two, and actions are really discrete and expedited throughout the initial body of the climate action plan. The section that will need some work is the framing of the work, the summary section at the beginning, and thinking about key authors. I had put in the CAP outline, I put the body of work, that component with the co-chairs. There was pushback on that at the council, so we've revised the draft outline that I'll email around to you, just to say Rural Resilience Subcommittee with staff support. And obviously Marion has been really integral in helping you all along, but I'm also recognizing that there'll likely need to be additional staff capacity brought to bear on both filling out the templates, refinements, and beyond. So starting to think about where capacity lies within the subcommittee would be really helpful today for all of us.
So and thank you for detailing that, Jane, because I was just going to say, can we categorize what we're actually asking for in terms of writing? Being a former poli-sci and public administration major, that doesn't scare me very much, because that we're used to writing, but writing can be, it's not everybody's forte. So maybe we want to pause there for a second and see who would have interest in helping with the drafting. Is that what you guys would like to know? Okay. So who is a good writer and understand and would like to assist with some of the drafting around this?
Catherine's an excellent writer. She's got so much time on her hands. I know she would love to do it. No, I'm teasing. We've got some limits on our time. We've got to finish up the comprehensive energy plan, which runs concurrent to this, and we have a chapter on land use. But Brahman and I can assist, to the extent we're possible. As long as we just need really clear assignments of what we're going to do, and clear deadlines, that will really help us kind of fit things in where we can. And then just a quick. I know SC stands for something, but it's not coming to me. It was RR and SC. What is SC?
Oh, subcommittee, sorry.
Okay. There's another potential link that we need to consider too, with the cross-sector mitigation group on land use, because they have transportation. So just a potential, I think likely, we need to connect with them at some time.
Did you want to, Jane and Miriam, talk about, because you didn't probably see it because it's such small print. I typed in there that we definitely need to coordinate around land use with other subcommittees, and I wasn't sure quite where that fit into the schedule, but totally good point, Chris.
Yeah, I feel like, I know Marion feels this too, I'm sure, but we've been holding back since that initial land use meeting, hoping for a clearer process to be adopted by the council to deal with cross-cutting ideas and themes. In absence of that, we still recognize and value that that the substance of that work will likely still happen at subcommittees who are working on it, but really like we want to consolidate and think about where the implementation and actions of that get refined, and want to pull together a smaller group representative of those interests to really think about how to do that beyond what we did at that first meeting. Now that those actions have been flushed out by the subcommittees, how do we continue to move it forward and ensure it's accurately reflected in the CAP? Because one of the things you'll see probably from the outline that was circulated ahead of the council meeting, I revisited where cross-cutting issues lived, and we put it front and center at the beginning of the pathways to highlight the key integral nature of things like land use in particular. But then I have gotten substantive pushback that that's not where it should go, that it should go but be focused in the implementation section, which is actually where we had it before. So we just need a group to make a decision and then think about the key next steps to actually carry out the details of that component of the work.
So in the chat, I put in that I would like to help with the RRA section, the summary and the, if we need to be framing out the strategies, pathway strategies and actions and the paragraphs related to that. Not a ton of time, but I definitely I'll prioritize and make time. We didn't spend all of this time leading up to this process just to, I just want to see it through. And Jens also wrote in the chat that he has some capacity to help as well. I assume, for folks on the subcommittee, as it relates to language and some of the drafting, if you can't help with at least drafting, maybe you can, there's an expectation that we would probably at least run portions of the draft or draft language by folks, especially the folks that were working on the strategies and actions to make sure that the language looks right. Is that appropriate, Jane and Marion? Is it expected? Yeah, encouraged? Okay.
Yeah, I don't dare volunteer to write, but I can volunteer to review.
I understand, Michael.
I'm in probably the same boat as Mike. Love to do more, but bandwidth constrained.
And to the extent that there's like an indicator, like a lead person who's responsible for sections, I find, we want to collaborate with everybody, but it can also slow people down as well. So if somebody, ideally somebody is drafting and then getting feedback from the others just to keep the process moving is what I think would be needed given where we are in the process and needing.
Jane, that sounds like that's the plan, to kind of have a lead person to write, people to comment, the full subcommittee gets to review. So
yeah, that is the intent, Chris. We just need to get a sense today of who actually has some capacity to help, and then we can start to frame that out. And the other thing, a couple things I was going to flag. So I think Pat put it in the chat. In the Ag and Ecosystems meeting this morning, they were reviewing a number of their actions and have a few around compact settlements and realize that they need to share those with you all. So in
a few
reflecting,
Marion said you had a lot. She represented you well. They said we've already done a lot of work in rural resilience. You guys do not have to tread this ground, but they needed to tread it a little bit.
So I think, and this is not perfect at all, but in light of getting a lot of folks in a room together is really difficult, and we're trying to work on figuring out that cross-cutting themes group. I know Chris and Bronwyn have done a good job already in looking at least pathways 1, 4, and 5 of flagging those actions that need to go to Ag and Ecosystems to review, being able to compile those. And that's something I can do if we can go through and flag those and share that with Ag and Eco, and they can look at those and sort of craft a response, and then vice versa, they'll be able to share those with you, so that we can at least start to have some back and forth about these actions, understanding there is a lot of overlap. And as much as we've tried to define where the overlap ends, that's not always possible. So we need to be able to share these because they were reviewing some that looked very similar to ones that you all have in terms of compact settlement.
If possible, I would vote for a written process to get it going, because
that's what I'm suggesting. Yes.
That's right. Although we could talk all day but get nowhere, especially on land use. That's great.
So
Thank you.
in terms of the drafting piece itself, what will happen to the spreadsheets as the cap is drafted? So should we be spending a lot of time getting those just so because they'll be inserted into the cap, or will that information be inserted in a different format?
There'll certainly be appendixes, but I also think that much of the language that you put in the spreadsheet, and Mary and I were thinking about that yesterday, hopefully you won't need much more detail than that as you're starting to frame out the pathway strategies and actions. So it'll be like a moving exercise, I think, into the Word document. But yeah, I think setting expectations around how much information is needed for pathway strategies and actions will help us understand how useful the spreadsheets are as well. But they'll certainly be in the back, and they're going to be a tool for what we use for prioritization and documenting the prioritization. So you're sort of building out the process right now, and I think that it's really will be helpful.
Jane, if I could just, I just want to speak to that tension, because folks inside baseball understand what these actions are saying. And my experience is, I have a very narrow expertise, and just stepping slightly outside of that, it's often very hard to figure out even what the action or the strategy is about. And so we really do need to walk that line, because they're not readily apparent what they mean to folks who aren't enmeshed in that world.
One thought on the actions too, and I know this is an ongoing discussion, but it will be an awful report to read if it has tons of actions. To the extent that our prioritization process identifies a very short list, some immediate, longer term, based on the different scales we're looking at. But I think it'd be really important. Just creating a list of ideas is not implementable without funding and policy work around them. So this is thinking through the next steps where we need to be in December, as far as all these ideas take money and resources to make happen. So just putting a pin in that for future consideration.
I really appreciate that, and in thinking about how and what we move forward with on, like, what we heard from was prioritization of all the actions, and then an implementation schedule, and that has felt kind of funny to Mary and I. So we're starting to play with how, like, looking at the hazard mitigation plan Marion drew on and was walking me through yesterday about, like, how high all, like, those priorities were all illuminated in the plan, and then some of the other ones were taken off. And so we've been that's the balance of, like, what goes into the body for actions and then what is in the spreadsheet and an appendix, and not lost for future iterations of the plan. But I certainly appreciate what Jens was saying about, like, inside baseball and understanding, make sure it's communicable. And so there's that balance of how much we put forward so that we have time to make it actually understandable for folks to read.
Okay, well, and so we've kind of transitioned into discussing what the final actions will look like in terms of format. Do we want to move into our spreadsheet review of actions?
Sounds good.
Any other final volunteers for assisting with drafting on the climate action plan? I just want to say, I mean, this is not a bribe or anything, but I make really good pickles. Like, really good pickles. So I'm just saying.
I make good cider. Maybe that would be better.
We'll put together a fall basket. I've got some dilly beans. I just made like 25 pints of salsa. Like,
I'm glad you put those 2 weeks to good use, like you had planned, Erica.
You really are an emergency planner. You are stocked.
I don't like to talk about that. I'm not going to talk about that on a public meeting. So, okay, why don't we get into our spreadsheet?
Okay, so give me a moment here. Well, can folks actually, I'm going to run a test. I put the link to the event from our calendar in the chat earlier. I'll put it in again. Can folks go and try and download the draft pathways, strategies, and actions list and tell me if it works?
I did it this morning. It does work.
Okay, some people are having issues and some people aren't, and I'm trying to figure out why some people are and some people aren't.
At first, it told me I needed a state password, and then I just ignored that, but it let me download the spreadsheet after, so.
Okay,
I wonder if it's web browser. Sometimes that is it, Marion. Like if your default browser is Internet Explorer, then I won't like it.
I had no problem on Chrome.
all right, good to know. Thanks for being my guinea pigs. We're wrestling a little bit with this new website and where the documents are posted, so. Anyway, if you have issues, let me know. I'll send you the version locally and we can go that way.
The new website is much too user-friendly for me. Where do I complain? No.
It's so nice. So nice.
We've already made some changes. I know it was hard for folks to find the calendar, so now the calendar is just a tab on the top. So
Yeah.
you don't have to go into the Get Involved page to find it. So already some improvements being made there, but.
I was complimenting you. It looks great.
No, thanks. Okay, so we can share, I'll share my screen a bit. I don't like sharing a screen with Excel documents. It's a bit difficult, but I do want to share and talk through a couple of different things. I'm not sure if it's the best use of our time to talk through every action and every pathway, but I have some framing questions that I'd like to lay out and talk through with folks and then figure out what still needs to be refined before we post for next week, what maybe needs to be added, and sort of what are those final conversations we need to have this week before we feel good to post it. Ideally next week, Tuesday. I'm here. Well, I'll share my screen. Just give me a moment here. The first thing I'd like to look at is actually not the actions. It's just the strategies tab. So if folks have it up on your own, feel free to pull it up on your own, but it's also here on the screen if you need to see it. And what I'd like to just do is take a moment and as a group, take a look at the pathway and then look at the strategies that we have associated with the pathway. So the way it's laid out, we have your strategy here, or excuse me, your pathway here, strategies outlined here. And I think this will be helpful because I don't think we've really done a full review of strategies since we've broken up into the pathway groups and have sort of been working on narrowing and consolidating and sort of sending some strategies to other sections. So taking a moment to review the strategies in relation to the pathway and thinking about a couple of things. One, does this group of strategies feels like it captures the vision or the intent of the pathway when we originally agreed on those and pulled them together? Two, is there anything that's jumping out in terms of broad strategies that you maybe heard in examples or context during the stakeholder engagement meeting this week? Or other things that have come up in conversation that you aren't seeing captured in the particular pathways. And I would encourage us to take looks at not just the pathway that you're familiar with, but the ones that other folks have been working on, again, because we haven't really done this comprehensive review with everyone. And I'd like to, identify those. This isn't something that we have to finalize for next week, especially if it's a strategy that may need a number of actions underneath. But I just want to make sure that we're having that comprehensive look at our pathways and the strategies associated with them to make sure we're not missing any huge gaps. So folks have it up. We can start with pathway one and just walk through the strategies and I can brainstorm and keep notes in this document. And then we'll move on to some specific questions that I have about actions, but we'll start with this first. So the first pathway is about our capacity. So local, regional, state agency capacity for resilience and planning. The first strategy is talking about a permanent statewide support for resilience, adaptation, preparedness, response, and recovery actions. This was language that we revised at our last meeting. So folks want to take a look at this and make sure it still looks good based on the conversations from our last meeting. I'm going to go through the strategies and then we'll just open up for comments and questions. Strategy 2 is talking about tools and resources to help communities assess their vulnerabilities, identify changes and investments needed, and long-term financial burdens of disasters to address and reduce long-term financial burdens on communities, businesses, and individuals. So the first one is support, really capacity and support. The second is tools and resources. The third is cross-sector collaboration across nonprofits, private organizations, sharing best practices and leveraging those resources. And then the fourth pathway is supporting workforce development and trades and skills that are needed to implement climate resilience and emissions reduction actions. So we have one around statewide support and capacity, tools and resources, cross-sector collaboration, and workforce development. So is there anything, we'll just leave it here for a second, anything that folks think is missing or that you maybe see highlighted in the pathway that you think maybe isn't captured in any one of these strategies. And we can certainly go look through the actions under the strategies. That's a lot to share on the screen right now. Go ahead, Jens.
Just wanted to flag the one in in pathway 4, municipal capacity building. And wondering if we wanted to move that up here to pathway 1, because it is more general. The existing strategy 1 speaks to the state focus, and the others are pretty specific to have very specific content. And so I'm wondering if a more general build municipal capacity is appropriate here in this pathway.
I'm not sure where that strategy and how it landed on 4 is, but I think when you look at some of the actions under pathway 1, strategy 1, there's definitely actions associated with being able to increase capacity around, the implementation of more robust planning and land use and stuff like that. So it's really meant to be, it's meant to apply to kind of across the board versus have it being sectioned out across the pathways.
And to respond to Jens, thanks for pointing out that municipal capacity building item. That's actually a question I have for us to talk about later on, because that one, the strategy in general needs a little more detail or a little more something behind it. But also if you actually look at the actions underneath, I think they're all actions taken directly from the 2018 State Hazard Mitigation Plan. And it was flagged in comments that Erica was going to review them. I'm not sure if you did or not, Erica, so we need to talk about that. But I do also want to talk about really our intent with including language directly from another state plan focused on climate in this plan, and whether that's really the best use of our action space, if there's maybe gaps that we need to fill or language changes that are needed based on work that's already happening to implement the State Hazard Mitigation Plan. So we can get to that one, but thanks for flagging that. And that's why I highlighted it green in the table in the first place for my brain to remember. Okay, Dave, go ahead.
Is business and industry meant to be included in pathway 1 and then strategy 3 of pathway 1? Is it part of community? I don't know.
Do folks who are working on pathway 1 want to answer that?
Yeah, you can add more specificity to it, but I see community being the whole package, the holistic, all the pieces of the community. Some of our pathways do get pretty long, so I don't know what to do there.
I see your point, David, that we, in strategy 3, we mentioned nonprofit, public and private organizations, but not private business. Is that what you're suggesting is whether private business should be included there?
Yeah, I think so. I just saw an email exchange. I saw an email exchange earlier on from among the RDCs about these upcoming events, and they want to make sure that businesses are represented. So if they're included, maybe we should add them, or specifically add them.
So you're suggesting, Dave, to add it to strategy 3 here?
Yeah.
To this list, and then, but we could keep the pathway language the same?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just going to take notes here and I'll clean it up afterwards.
And is there a difference in business and industry? Or is it private sector? Is that a better word?
I'll defer.
I don't want to word it. Sorry.
Yeah, maybe use one, but
Yeah.
What do folks think? Private sector, business and industry? If you were to read private sector, does that capture business and industry and perhaps others? There is private organizations. It's maybe different than private sector.
not clear what that means.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I think people in the business community look for the word business.
Okay.
I think
So we think business and industry.
Yeah, and I think industry is a little different than business. So yeah, I think
Right.
business and industry.
Chad, just may say like 2 sentences more about why they're different.
I think of industrial processes as big users of electricity. Businesses could be down to the general store that we were talking about earlier. restaurants. Yeah.
Okay, so then back to something Pat said, can someone elaborate on what private organizations are?
I meant that for business. So obviously it's not
Yeah, I
clear.
think it's like nonprofit, public, and private
Uh-huh.
organizations, and organizations refers to all three.
Yeah, it's like GMP and B-Trans should work together, I think is what it meant. That type of thing.
Can we just call it business and industry just to be
Yeah,
clear?
I think that'd be
So
fine.
replace private organizations with business and industry.
I thought you were referring to fraternities or something. I wasn't sure. Chris, you had your hand up.
This goes more back to the item that Jens raised and that Marion was talking about. I was going to put on my kind of comparative public administration academic geek hat and write up something for the council just to consider that kind of looks at different levels of government and efficacy. Like if something absolutely has to happen, where is it most likely to happen, as opposed to like deferring to optional action. And this gets to, I mentioned last time, this gets to kind of fundamental fairness, equity, and justice issues too. That is, if you're trying to make sure that there are responses to a frontline population or folk who are at risk or whatever the case may be, if you put it to a town's option to act, then that's not going to be particularly just outcome. So I'm just going to kind of write up just kind of an assessment that I'd recommend the council support as far as like going back. It would probably have to, I don't know that it would necessarily be an action before, as part of the plan, but as before the plan is developed, but something to be done as a result of the plan, which is where we really go back and look at where will concrete action steps take place under Vermont's system of governance, as opposed to just kind of saying, we hope these things might help. So anyway, I'm just going to take a crack at that. It's going to be kind of more of a bulletized thing, but I'll share that once. I hope to get it done by next week.
Chris, is you just mentioning that you think it would be an action that would take place after? I mean, to me, that speaks to Pathway 1, which talks about capacity and sort of an evaluation of at what level of governance or what level of the state that capacity exists or should exist. And if you, in addition to writing something up for the council to consider, have language around a strategy or an action that you think should be included in rural resilience's proposals, I know I'd be curious to see that. And I'm wondering what other subcommittee members think.
Chris,
in the conversation with the council around how to bucket actions, there's been some consideration around like, well, we should bucket actions based on like at where they need to occur. So like legislative actions, programmatic actions, individual actions. And in the conversation this morning that I was having with someone, and it seems to resonate with what you're suggesting too, Chris, is maybe an appropriate way to bucket actions isn't by like legislation, rulemaking, but by statewide action, community level, and individual action. And then further thought would be council action, because there's still a lot of future work that will live with the council after December 1st. So, but I really like the idea of like considering where the actions fall, like at what level, and then of course ensuring that there's capacity to support them at whichever level they occur.
Yeah, so so Mary, yeah, I'll draft up and then maybe we figure out where it fits and how it fits. And it's intended just to be, if it's useful, we can use it, and it can be torn apart and rebuilt and everything else, but I'll just try to pull something together. I'll try to do that as soon as possible.
Chris Cochran, did you have a comment to Chris's comment? Or
I'm going to hold for now. Thanks.
Is it right if we call on a public person? I think Dale had a comment.
Yep.
Okay, Dale, go ahead.
Thank you so much. This is something that I had actually intended to say later on during public comment, but it actually builds right off of what Jane was just talking about. And so I thought I would offer it now. And that is that I recognize how much work has gone into the pathway strategies and actions. And it's really impressive, and I think a remarkable list. one thing that I noticed as I was reading through the actions earlier today is that none of them identify the actor. And I think that if this group can start to think about who is the entity responsible for each of those actions, I think that will go a long way to resolving that question that Jane was just talking about. In the spirit earlier, you were asking for volunteers from amongst your subcommittee, but because I am trying to suggest that you do even more work than you're already doing by adding that into all these actions, I will offer myself as a resource as well, if anyone considers that useful. I think you all should know how to get a hold of me. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Marion, let's see, I think we have a little more time to go, but anything else on this you want to cover? And there may be some more specific actions you want to talk about as well, so.
Well, yeah, I would, I mean, I'm finding it helpful to walk it through at the strategy level, but if folks would prefer to look at actions, we can do that too.
I think we do though need to, I mean, once we get further down, we need to just refine some of the language on our action, the strategies. I mean, that's really helpful.
So you're suggesting staying in what we're doing now?
Yeah, unless there's specific actions that like what Marion, you had flagged, like, and on the municipal capacity building, which up front, I totally missed that. So we can.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think.
Another set and not those ones. So anyway.
I think given the
go ahead.
time and the fact that we weren't able to get these out to folks in advance, I think it probably would not be helpful to try to go through the actions at this point.
No, and I think honestly, even if we had gotten in advance, I don't know if it would be helpful to go through them. So I have a list of that. It's not a whole lot. And I think if you take a look, well, let's go through the strategies related to the actions. Maybe try not to wordsmith too much, but if that's really needed for some of these, we can. And then I will walk through kind of the spreadsheet because the format of it has changed a bit. And then I think we'll just have to identify what is the next step for us as a subcommittee to review these actions. If it makes more sense to do it on our own and share comments back, we can look at how Ag and Eco did it. I don't know, Pat, if you think that was the best way to do it, but you're right, Catherine, I don't think it's a good use of time right now. So I would prefer to go through just the strategies to look at them in relation to pathways and wordsmith here if we need to.
And really make sure that, as we're reading through these, to put yourselves in somebody else's shoes that doesn't know anything about this and make sure that it seems like clear and what it's articulating is really clear and straightforward.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'll watch the time, Marion, so you can go for it.
Thank you. Okay, so pathway 2 is proactively and strategically invest to enhance resilience in a number of infrastructure categories. And there are 4 strategies here: create a policy, planning, and organizational foundation to support investments, be prepared to respond and recover quickly to disruptions caused by severe weather and threats, increase resilience to severe weather by reducing vulnerabilities, and increase resilience by improving system efficiency, reliability, and redundancies. What do folks think about these?
On the second strategy, that's one where I think it's not necessarily clear enough. I think we need to just add some additional language in there about who we're talking about. And I just from the Pathway 2 committee, is it that we're asking utilities and service providers to assess their capacity and address gaps in order to be prepared to respond and recover quickly? Or because when we say be prepared to respond and recover quickly, are we just talking about like communities, the state, individuals, utilities, everyone? Or are we trying to communicate to a certain subset of like infrastructure operators? And it stinks that Mike had to jump off, but
Joe's not here. Joe is out today, so I don't know if Anne is on. She might be the only one left.
Or it may be like infrastructure operators, or there may be another term to use here.
Oh, I don't think we have anyone. I mean, one thing we could do is go look at the actions that are listed underneath this to see what the intent was with those specific actions. I believe it.
maybe- And this is something we could always follow up on too.
Yeah,
after
I
the
think we may
meeting.
need to. Yeah.
It's good.
And I had a similar question about the first strategy. Wanting to understand exactly what that means. I think it's a lofty goal, but it doesn't, I think we need more specificity about the intent. Like who's creating this foundation? What does a foundation mean? Are we reorganizing things? Are we setting up a new thing? Is it lots of different things?
I think on this one, seeing the actions going underneath it helps explain the strategy, but I don't want to talk about actions.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, it is a little tough just seeing the strategies because again, the strategies are a collection of actions. So what I think they're referring to is policy planning and organizational foundations at utilities, at municipalities. It's really a multi-level approach, but maybe it just means we need to sort of change the words that are used to define that better. And then the same with two, it may be they're asking municipalities, utilities, the state, and individuals to all be prepared and recover from quickly. I don't think that's the intent, but that could be one way to change the wording, and then you have multiple actions at those levels underneath.
I wonder if the first strategy one is really enhance the policy planning and organizational foundation of XYZ to support effective investments in infrastructure resilience. To me, this is like your strategic strategy. It's like your strategy on being strategic about the way you invest. So I don't know how best to word that though.
Okay, well, I think just because these folks aren't here, I'll send these notes out to everyone. And they have a couple of these
3 and 4 are really clear.
Okay.
Right.
Good to move on to number 3. All right, so this is the reduction of fossil fuel use for municipalities, school districts, residential, university, and hospitals. 2 strategies here, providing tools and resources to help assess data needs, and being covered up here, and establish best practices, and then equitably expand access to programs. There was some discussion at the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee meeting that we really need to take a look at their actions and ensure that we are complementing them and not restating them or restating them in a slightly different way. So I will take that on in terms of sharing the cross-sector actions that they just shared late last week, and think about how to ensure that what is in pathway 3 is helping complement that. Because I will say there was some concern addressed at cross-sector that this group is taking on writing mitigation actions, which it may have been me being unclear about what the pathway 3 group is working on, but it's also very clear in statute that this subcommittee is charged with this, which we made clear to cross-sector. So the resolution was to take the cross-sector actions, take a look at those. And again, we only got those late last week, so.
And if they have specific suggestions for us under pathway 3, I'm sure our task group would be thrilled to hear them.
I agree.
Something that came out of the engagement session from my subgroup was we had a number of people that were obviously on like energy committees, local energy committees, and they, especially as it related to like weatherization programs and just programs that are available to people, they talked about there are just a lot of people that they're not getting to, like the information is not getting to about the resources and programs that are out there. And hopefully, and they also talk about some of the programs that are really underfunded. So one that was referenced was a program out of St. Johnsbury that's been kind of historically underfunded and understaffed. I don't know if David Snedeker has any visibility on that one, but they're like, maybe with the new ARPA money, there'll be more money coming to them and they'll be able to get more resources out to people. But it was really like the outreach capacity and landing the information in the hands of people that could really use it. And then there's just a whole segment of the population that is just like, I'm okay with burning 6 cords of wood, every year. I don't really care. I like my oil furnace and I'm really not going to change. I mean, so it was kind of there was a lot of conversation around that, and I kind of want that really fed into this pathway.
I think that's a really good point to bring up and make sure we address, especially when you think about, those who are low income are often time poor as well. So having the capacity to search down a program and do the application and figure out who's going to come and take care of it for you is not something that's going to be top of your list.
I would add too, it's a concern I have if, the EV and weatherization strategies, unless there's a way to actually support the populations we're trying to help, it just won't help them. It'll be people like me and Catherine who know how to work the system who will.
I still haven't figured it out. My energy audit was done 6 years ago and I've done nothing.
Erica, is that related to code enforcement for St. Johnsbury?
I'm not sure. It was a program, a weatherization program, and that they were talking about in St. J. It was a gentleman out of Glover that was talking about it, and he said it was, historically underfunded and understaffed and under-resourced. So, but I didn't catch it. But what the sentiment was that there may be programs out there that support weatherization that can benefit from additional resources, and that layered that with additional outreach capability and getting the information in the hands of people that either may not care or could really, really use it.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I'm just aware of time, so keep moving along.
Sure.
Yeah.
What,
I'll
one
add
quick-
that one thing that came up in our group that's related to this pathway is that there are no incentive programs or assistance programs readily available for municipalities or schools that want to do electric vehicles in their fleets.
Yeah.
And that definitely seems like a program gap that we would want to highlight here.
Marion, I had a question about that too. I didn't see transportation in there. Was that left to the cross sector, or is that something rural resilience to tend to about the transportation questions for rural communities?
Yeah, good question. I mean, this language is taken almost directly from the Global Warming Solutions Act, and it didn't call out transportation. So I think that's left pretty squarely to, it's tough. It's left, pretty squarely to cross sector, but I think transportation is a huge issue for rural communities. So I think it's worth addressing. I think to a lot of these points, I'll need to take a look at the actions that are under strategy 2. Again, I think that's why we changed the language to say equitably expand access to programs, trying to get at that point that oftentimes these programs aren't reaching the people that they really should be reaching. And I think there's something about outreach and education. There's an action, but if not, we can refine it a bit further. And then think about transportation. I think that will be, there's a lot going on in cross sector with transportation. So maybe then, and Gina and Joey will be the ones to say they've been thinking about equity and access in rural communities the whole time. So maybe there's not too much that we need to complement in terms of actions created here, but I can't say for certain.
Chris Campany, Yuta.
On the weatherization, I don't know how specific y'all want to get in actions, but to my mind, what really needs to happen is, maybe it could even be with support like Vista Volunteers or others, but people literally going door to door, making people aware of the efficiency programs at work, but then also, ultimately be able to assign that person with a human being who can walk them through those programs, because they are pretty complex. I'm like Catherine, we've done audits and all, and thank goodness, I've taken days off to work on this stuff. Not everybody has time to do it. So, and then the other thing, Marion, I don't know if you guys have thought ahead in the plan, if you want to do any like sidebars about examples of what's working. But like we had, now this was through Clean Energy Development Fund money set aside for us through the Vermont Yankee settlement with Entergy, but we've had this modern wood heat program where we've been changing out the systems in most of the schools in the region and other public buildings. And so that helps them with the transition to more greenhouse gas reduction friendly mode of heat, but also then creates supply for local wood to go into these systems. But the reason I bring that up, we've got reports though. If you wanted to like highlight something like that, that'd be an example in that section of what could be done if the funding's available to do it. So if in the report you want to do something like that, I'm just using that as an example, and that would be a pretty easy thing to do right there. Andy, or you can get it directly from Andy Perchlik, or we're happy to provide it too.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, it's certainly something we thought about. I have to say, I'm not sure the December 1st report will have that. We're not sure the report will even be copy edited. So that may be something that we look at later in the winter, but I appreciate that.
Why don't we keep moving just because of time, but clearly.
Thanks, Pat. All right, moving on to 4. This one has a couple more here. So this is land use policies. We talked about this one quite a bit at our last meeting, but let's review it again. Sorry, it's not fitting on my screen very well. So the first one is support forest pattern. I think you'll see there's quite a bit of comments around the actions under this one and then the wording of this strategy, that it needs to be beefed up a little bit. I would also argue this is one that should really be discussed and shared with ag and ecosystems to figure out how to complement a lot of the work that they already have in their actions around support forest pattern. So I'm not sure how much time we want to spend discussing this, but welcome any quick comments on this one.
We didn't touch it intentionally for that reason. I just,
Okay. All right. Strategy 2 is establish a statewide conservation and buyout program. I have a question on this one because I think it's specific language from the 2018 State Hazard Mitigation Plan. And I know there has already been funding, at least for the first year or so, for this type of program.
This is, no, I mean, there's ARPA funding for it. And it's very, it's limited to what is eligible under the I think it's like the Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund, because that's the ARPA eligibility. What we're talking about here is establishing a permanent state level hazard mitigation program that is state funded, that is not dependent on random federal funding opportunities that may become available. It's really establishing the institutional capacity and the program on a permanent basis versus, based on a federal funding stream that'll dry up in 5 years.
So let's rewrite that to make that as specific as you were just saying.
Yeah, I agree. Because I also think to me, it seems confusing to have the same action in 2 state plans that are both working on being implemented, like the crossover of implementers and the tracking process. That's hard for me to.
In particular, I did review these and the actions associated with these, and while it's in the state hazard mitigation plan as a goal or a strategy, it doesn't necessarily mean it's being successful, and it has not been successful thus far in establishing a permanent program. So that's why it's really important for it to really be called out in the climate action plan under this pathway, because it is so important, and it'll bring the attention it needs, as well as the legislative action behind it, hopefully, that it needs to establish some permanence.
And Erica, I wonder if we need to add the word permanent there. Establish a permanent statewide conservation and buyout program might even be better to be really specific. Said. Dan, did you want to?
This is Ben. I was just going to say thank you, Erica. And if you add the word permanent, I think that goes a long way.
Perfect.
Awesome.
The ones under municipal capacity building, I missed. And so Ben, if you want to just take a quick look at those ones for when they come up, because I think those are ones that are kind of either lower level or already kind of in process that we could probably boot.
I'm sorry, which ones?
If you go to the Pathway 4 tab on this spreadsheet and go under the municipal capacity building, there's a bunch of ones that are highlighted for us.
Okay.
Thanks.
And just a question, is that green line going to stay in there, or is that getting moved? What's happening to that line?
That's what I think Ben's going to look at right now. Okay. Everything under there is from the state hazard mitigation plan.
Gotcha.
So I think we want to be really strategic about what we're including in this plan for prioritization that's already listed in the state hazard mitigation plan. I think so. We'll have to hear from VEM folks about what needs to stay and what not. It may be that all the actions under here don't need to be there, and then this may not be a needed strategy.
Right. That number 6. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Anything else on this one? 1 through looks like 8.
Any big things around land use that came up in the stakeholder workshop?
It's perfect. We don't need to do anything. No.
Great job, Chris and Bronwyn. And everybody else.
Can you scroll up just a little, Marion?
Yes, sorry, my screen's tiny.
There was one, I'm sorry, that had like forest pattern. It was like 3 words.
Oh, yes. So this is one, it's essentially been flagged for further conversation with ag and ecosystems.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think much work has been done on it because of the understanding that those conversations need to happen.
Jane and Marion, what we talked about in ag this morning, there's like compact development. I think what we said is ag and eco is going to leave it as a action or strategy, I can't remember which, and then just note for even for the Climate Council needs further discussion with rural resilience. So maybe something like that. Each group can notate to the council that further work is needed between groups, of, at least in this submittal.
And one thing that we talked about related to forest pattern and I think other flood resilience efforts upstream, it's our focus is ensuring those activities help protect the communities and compact settlement areas rather than looking at it from the ecosystem perspective.
Maybe it should say support forest pattern. I don't know, it needs, but whatever to do, just what Catherine said, because then you can describe the outcome of the purpose and it's clear why it goes here.
Hey guys, is strategy 2 and strategy 7 2 alike?
So let's see, 2 and 7.
Are they redundant?
They could be combined.
I think they could be.
Does number 7 need to say buyout in it though? Again, because
It should. I mean, it should. We would need to add some language, just a couple more words to 7, and then we could probably put the actions from 2 under 7.
make it shorter.
Does someone want to work on combining that?
Erica, do you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, I can do that.
Awesome.
I mean, I think we're looking at develop permanent private and public funding sources, but yeah, we can do that.
Right. Should we move on to the last pathway here?
In case you didn't see it, Dave noted that someone at the meeting suggested using current use program to better control development.
That may be another crossover because Marion, was there a current use issue in the ag and eco as well that they talked about? So that may be one we have to flag for both.
Yeah, that's been a big topic of conversation with them.
Current use is so easy to change.
There's like no appetite to go back for current use changes. So yeah, 100% no appetite. Can you go up for 1 minute again? I just want to, sorry, because I actually really like the support forest pattern, but I want to make sure I understand it. I'm sorry to fixate on it, but it's not like, Catherine, what you were just suggesting made sense to me. It's like, it's looking at forest conservation with the lens of strategically to protect our infrastructure, which I think is why I see it as different here than what maybe ag and ecosystems are talking about. We are talking about it more from a functions and values perspective of the natural communities and processes. So I guess I just thought if that's what you're saying, it'd be great just to put a finer point on it, which looks like Marion's trying to. Yeah.
And also we get to that a little bit in the second one that we're going to combine when we talk about developing the public and private funding sources to restore ecosystem services upstream. So we get to that in that one that we're going to combine, and maybe there's some wordsmithing. Maybe we combine the forest pattern with the second half of that one and then do something like that.
Just have one strategy with everything.
Let's just do it. One giant run-on sentence.
No, that's called a pathway.
No, it's a goal. I like goals.
God.
Oh, we can't make it. No.
All right, let's move on to 5.
Oh, before we do, Zach, we have a couple hands up, and Zach Porter is hoping he can comment on forest pattern.
I see Ben and Bronwyn too. Yeah. Do you want to go Ben and then Bronwyn and Zach? Ben, did you have another comment?
No, I failed to take my hand down. I apologize. I will take it down now.
Thank you, sir. Bronwyn.
I guess I just wanted to flag that in going through these pathways, I think, we definitely agree that supporting the forest pattern is important. I think the reason we flagged it is because ultimately, if the actions to do that are the same, even if they're intended to reach different outcomes, we're interested in maybe protecting it because it helps protect the built infrastructure. Ag and ecosystem is interested in that for inherent value in that land. The outcome or the intent of it might be different, but if the action is the same, if the action can achieve both of those, it seems like, I just think we don't want to be setting ourselves up to repeating actions all over the place just because they're coming from a different perspective. They have a different intent. So I think the reason we flagged it there is just because, again, ag and eco might have the same exact pathway and strategy and the same exact actions, but just for different purposes. And that can be described in context and prose, but I don't think we need to be repeating the actions themselves. So that was kind of the reason why we pulled that out and said, this really deserves a conversation with ag and eco to be able to present it in a really concise way.
Okay, great. No, that's very helpful. Zach.
Zach Porter, I'm the Lake Champlain Lake Keeper at Conservation Law Foundation, and I'm stepping on Dale's toes. I know that she's been with you all for the long haul, and I've been with the Ag and Eco Committee, but I'm glad I'm joining you for this conversation today as we're kind of getting into the more substantive discussions. I just wanted to say, and honestly, we haven't even had the chance to have these conversations at Ag and Eco yet, but I don't know how much you all have talked about, kind of the nuances of forest management related to emergency management and flood risk reduction and whatnot. And I think it's come up a little bit maybe in your recent stakeholder meeting from what I hear just the other day. But what I wanted to convey to you all is that it turns out, and this is working in our favor, the best things that we can do to reduce flood risk, to reduce risk from droughts by increasing water storage, the best thing we can do to restore native ecosystems across the state of Vermont is to all do the same thing, which is to increase forest structure and complexity. It really is kind of simple when it comes down to it. And so if we're looking at kind of restoring Vermont's native ecosystems for climate resilience and adaptation, as well as preparing our communities for the disasters that we know are inevitable, the best thing we can do is to remove roads in our forests that are contributing downstream sediment and endangering our communities from just increased runoff, and by managing our forests in a way that increases that structural complexity. And so that means older forests and more structurally complex forests, which are things that Vermont conservation design calls for and the State Hazard Mitigation Plan calls for. So I think I just want to make sure that you all know that there is a great deal of overlap. And so the good news is that this subcommittee and the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee ideally can be pulling together in that direction. And it doesn't need to be that the committees are kind of proposing different kind of ecosystem management goals. There's a lot more to say there, but don't want to go on for too long. I appreciate the opportunity just to weigh in while we're on this topic. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Zach. So again, I think this one does need some wording, and it's definitely gonna need some further discussion with the other subcommittee. All right, let's go to 5 just because of time here. It's about 2:30. We have about 29 minutes left. So.
Sorry, I was on mute. So this is our pathway about housing. Talks about safe, accessible, energy efficient, and affordable housing in location efficient, compact, mixed-use neighborhoods with a diverse selection of housing types and access to services and jobs. Strategy 1 is around updating state and local land use governance, regulations, practices, and investments. Strategy 2 is around increasing investments in the preservation and development of affordable housing. Strategy 3 is improving existing rental housing. Strategy 4, ensure that Vermonters who are vulnerable to housing and stability have access to fair and affordable housing. And strategy 5 is funding research, data collection, and digital maps to provide insight on housing development.
Bronwyn.
That may be an old hand.
Old hand, sorry.
No worries. I hesitate to raise this with Lemmy because it came up in the public engagement on earlier this week in ag. In equitable access to jobs, services, schools, recreation, do you want to add the word food in there as well? And I'm thinking about the conversation you just had about small rural stores where people have access, which have a greater range of choices, and it's related to compact development, and it's related to ag. And I don't know if you want to include it there or not, but.
Services means to me like a range of things, grocery store, dentists,
maybe that covers it.
Do we just agree to say services includes food? Folks feel okay with that? You can't see anyone, so.
I'm okay with that.
Okay, great, thank you.
That's how I would read it as well.
Yeah, okay.
And does ag and ecosystems has a bunch about food systems in there,
Yeah.
don't they? Yeah. So it's not like that whole area is being ignored.
No, there's no gap there.
There is a home for it somewhere. Okay.
Any other of these strategies in particular that folks are seeing either could be combined, maybe there's a gap, needs more clarification? What do we have here about? I think I copied over, these are comments from the old spreadsheet. Probably Bronwyn's comments.
Yeah, anything else on this last one, 5, and its strategies? All right.
I will just say that in the interest, if I'm trying to think about, even though I don't have to and I'm not supposed to, thinking about, what this looks like when it's on paper in a final climate action plan. So since this is the last strategy, just wanted to flag that there's the workforce development, the funding for the research and data collection. I think these are quote unquote strategies that are going to show up across nearly every pathway, across nearly every subcommittee. And so in the interest of trying to keep this condensed and readable to the average person and see, where are there large groups of actions that really do, I guess, not to use this word one more time, but are cross-cutting against all of this, there may be an advantage to pulling out the workforce development piece across everything, pulling out the additional research and data across everything, as opposed to seeing it as a strategy in a bunch of different places.
Yeah, thanks, Bronwyn. This came up also in ag and ecosystems, and it is something we've been thinking about and was included in what Jane presented to the Climate Council, where there's sort of 2 sets of things we need to think about at a cross-cutting level. There's the sort of cross-cutting issues or those policy level things that need a lot of discussion, like land use. And then there's sort of those cross-cutting themes like workforce, funding, research, data needs that are going to show up across the pathways. And we're thinking about how best to display those and ensure that there's something that speaks to them at a higher level, identifying that, workforce development is really needed for us to address the climate crisis across all of these things. So yeah, we're certainly thinking about flagging those as well.
Right. Other questions on 5 for now? Oh,
Yeah.
Jens, did you have sorry, Catherine. Jens?
Do we have public transportation and incentivizing buses and improving public transportation in rural communities adequately covered elsewhere? I'm just looking at the location efficient part of this strategy and just wanted to make sure we captured it under 3 or somewhere else. I'm not as familiar with those actions.
I think it's covered in cross-sector mitigation.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
But it's something that we should look for to make sure that rural is given it's the attention it deserves when we see their recommendations. In looking at these, what I notice is that the 4th one stands out for not being as actionable as the others. So we have update, increase, improve, and fund. And then we have ensure that. And so that one, I don't know a better action word there that I can think of off the top of my head, but it seems like we should tweak the wording of that one a little bit.
I know is the word commit. I know, Catherine, you're right. I don't know, but the word is commit. I'm not sure what it is either.
It's tough. We're already required to. It's just
Maybe we'll note that for now and think maybe-
If we're already required to, then why
yeah.
do we need a strategy for this? And what do we need to do differently? I guess would be my question. So,
That's a fair point. I think it was important to put this in for.
oh, I agree. Even if we are required to do it, I'm just wondering if there's more specificity we could add to get to what we really need to do to ensure that that happens.
This is,
Maybe
This was another one where the actions, I think, help and maybe it means the wording needs to change to better summarize those actions, but it's implement the recommendations of the analysis of impediments to fair housing, increase funding for community-based homelessness prevention and rapid rehousing, increase funding for municipal planning grants to accelerate ongoing work to plan ARPA-related housing and infrastructure investments. So maybe it's that the strategy.
Yeah, maybe it's just a rewording that it's increase access to fair and affordable housing for Vermonters who are vulnerable to housing instability. So just changing the wording a little bit.
Yep.
Good.
It's then it speaks to what's going to change from our status quo because we're increasing their access through those actions you just summarized, Bronwyn. So that was helpful. Thank you.
Good. All right. Okay, so we have about 20 minutes left. So Marion, I think probably in co-chairs, what we probably need to do is talk about how we get from today to a submitted matrix. So Marion, I don't know if you have some thoughts on the co-chairs.
Sorry, I'm fixing my wording here. I just really quickly want to reorient folks to the spreadsheet. So it should look fairly similar. The one change that I made is to try and make it a bit more sortable if you need to, is you'll see actions are laid out. You'll see strategies repeated multiple times so that if you need to sort for whatever reason, you can still have the strategy attached with the action. If that's confusing, you could, merge and just have one like what we did on the strategies tab. But for ease of sorting and kind of cutting and pasting, this was an easier approach for me. Strategy IDs with the one and then actions IDs here, changing a little bit Bronwyn's approach, but I'm trying to keep at least some level of numbering. I have a column E for notes from the old spreadsheet, so I didn't want to lose any comments from the old spreadsheet. Some of it may be, again, a little confusing because it's referencing the old numbering system, at least that some folks were using, but again, keeping the notes for reference. And then if I had some thoughts, put in new notes. And then as I noted in my email, there were some actions that folks were recommending move to other pathways. So I did move those and I highlighted them yellow. And what I'd recommend if you're a pathway lead or anybody really, take a look at anything that's yellow under your pathway to ensure that that action fits and is in the appropriate strategy. Again, it was a recommendation from where it was living before. So it will be new to you if it hadn't been discussed with you previously. And then the other things that I added, and we don't need to do this for next week, but I just want to flag them, is again, keeping the goals up here as we start to think about, as Jane talked about, some sort of the prioritization or assessment on impact. We may want to think about either how to think about actions in relation to the goals that we've set for each pathway or some other way to assess progress towards GWSA goals. It's a lot easier to do for mitigation than it is for resilience and adaptation. So I'm putting it out there now because it's going to be a bit of a struggle to work with, but maybe it's just a high, medium, low, and we do sort of a qualitative assessment. And then also thinking about co-benefits is something we'll have to think about for impact. So does it meet multiple goals or initiatives? Does it help with sequestration as well as resilience and some sort of high, medium, or low rating there? Again, we don't have to think about this right now, but I wanted to flag those to start having those columns there as we think about the prioritization. So yes, so let's talk about what changes or adjustments are needed. I think it'd be helpful for folks, especially to take a look at the new notes, take a look at anything that moved over. Finishing up and ensuring that we've wordsmithed and appropriately cut over the new strategy, and if we've changed any pathway language. I'm trying to think what else. And how do we best want to do that? Continue to do it in our pathway lead?
Yeah, and remember, you don't have this, today's Friday, and the goal is to get this to the climate council posted on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Bronwyn.
Given what Patrick just said, I feel like what I'm about to say is less important because of the timeline. But I think we did hear in the conversation today some other ways of either categorizing or thinking about these actions, including who exactly is the implementer. And now we also are talking about maybe the time frame for implementation, and we're talking about the equity lens and how we're going to use all that to prioritize. So just wanted to flag that as unwieldy as it might be, I do find it helpful to be able to flag these actions with those things in a column so that they can quickly be reorganized for however you want to view them. If you want to view all of the actions that have to be implemented by the state versus be implemented by someone else, you can pull them all together pretty quickly. And I also think that would help with the prioritization if we're flagging in the columns some using some sort of, you know, common framing for equity, as opposed to just putting it in notes.
Yeah, and you're right, Bronwyn, and we have, I think it was a template that Jane shared out months ago that has all of those in there. I didn't want to overwhelm you all, and because the equity consultant, anyway, that process is still being defined. I didn't want to put them all in here, but if you all would prefer, I can easily add those columns in here, re-upload it to the website, and then everything is in there for you all to look at.
And I guess, Marion, one question that brought for you all, though, is for the Climate Council to not overwhelm them. I mean, I think this
well,
is,
then we can just hide the columns for them.
I'm assuming that what they'll want to see is a relatively clean sheet without yellow, without notes. It just has strategies and actions, unless you all fill the notes, you just stay in. What do you all think?
I think
No, I was suggesting that for our internal processes to get to a point where we do have a concise, consolidated thing that would be presented.
And I think that's all really good. Chris,
yeah, just columns are easy to hide. The other point I want to make too is, you know, we still have stakeholder engagement next week. So I just want to leave open the opportunity to add actions or refine these. I know we have a deadline, but I just want to make it clear that this could still change. We could have missed something.
Chris, when is that? What's the day of that one?
There are 3. It's the big public ones, Pat. So they're not going to be sort of specific to, I mean, who knows, maybe they will, but they're the broader public engagement events. But you're right, there could certainly be. And I think yeah, you all can decide if you want to keep notes in or not, clean it up and how to present it to the council. But I think everyone is acknowledging that these are still very much a work in progress, and stuff's going to be added as the engagement information goes out and comes back in. And feedback.
Yeah, I share your concern, Chris. It's one I raised a while ago, that we were required to submit our draft actions and strategies prior to the public engagement, in this case, even starting, really. So it's definitely a challenge. And I think we need to be really clear in our work that this is a point of time. It's the best that we have right now with the engagement that we've had, and that we expect it will change.
So in terms of, is this in terms of cleaning this up for the council, not necessarily for the internal work, like hiding columns is noted, is this something you want to leave to Marion? Do you want to lead to the kind of the pathway leads, whatever we called them? How do you want to kind of get this cleaned up for the next few days? Sorry.
Right. We only have a couple of days, really. So I would suggest, I would like to ask Marion if you have the capacity to be the recipient of all of our comments on the actions that we would get to you by a point in time, say Tuesday morning. Do you have that capacity?
I think what we're talking about here is refining our pathway tab down to the actions we want to move forward to the Climate Council, and doing so by close of business Monday, and sending it to Marion just so that she can combine it into one spreadsheet. Is that what I'm hearing? Am I hearing that correctly? Or am I?
It's already combined into one spreadsheet.
I know, but if we're asking our pathway leads to take one more look at the actions and make sure they're cleaned up. That's what I'm saying.
Oh, I was thinking that it was, everybody should have a chance to look at it and provide comments, not just the pathway leads, because this is the first that some of us have seen of all of the actions, I think.
So what we,
So I don't know, I'm throwing ideas out there.
no, it's really fair. So what, I'm not sure this is the best process. What we did for ag and eco was we then, because we can't have a working document together, right? Because of open meeting law. So we sent out an Excel spreadsheet. It's much like Marion said, and says any notes you want to add, any issues, have at it. People individually did, some people didn't, and they all forwarded back, and actually Marley and that group from a state agency person kind of consolidated it. It left a lot of questions, at that point, which, are something that you all can talk about later, but don't have time to digest next week so much. That's the challenge.
Yeah, I am happy to be the recipient of edits and comments. I will say, in pulling this together, I had a lot of questions around existing comments that were still in people's tabs and like what moved around. And so I would just request that folks be very clear about your comments and understand that if it's ambiguous, we're going to have to raise it as a question that will be addressed after the council meeting.
I mean, at the end of the day, Catherine and I have to present on a suite of actions, and they have to like look clean. So, so I would say, a number of us have been really reading through a lot of these actions. A number of us have been on multiple pathway groups and are pretty familiar with these actions. So really, unless there's something that's completely repetitive or is just downright shouldn't be on there, I mean, I would hope that there aren't like a lot of changes to the actions unless they're super repetitive.
Well, I think folks need to take a look at it. And again, it's not going to be perfect what we post on Tuesday. There's some that are just too vague as actions right now that really need some additional like refinement and, identification of like, who are you actually talking about here? And those are flagged in questions and had been flagged previously and haven't been resolved yet. So I think I think I agree with Catherine. I think everybody should have an opportunity to comment and send comments back to me. I can compile and post at some point on Tuesday. I'm super busy on Tuesday. So yeah. Yes.
And
you can
also,
send it to me.
Marianne, I can, I can probably assist with, hold on.
The tough thing with spreadsheets is it's really hard to have multiple people doing that. It's tough. But
Great.
One thought for sure. I do think it's important that Catherine and Erica review the thing before it's posted as your co-chairs. I mean, you all look at it now, but then whatever the version you're going to post, I think the co-chair should definitely take one last look at it. And about your free time.
I think that means it's not going to be up until Wednesday then.
Probably.
Because if we're not, if we're okay with moving it to Wednesday.
Here, so Marion and Jane will say they have a deadline. They're working for the council. It's Tuesday. Ag is not going to get their matrix in until later in the week. I'll just note that as well. So you do with that what you will.
Well, we want to stick to our deadline, but
yeah, I just want to caution that. I mean, you can, whenever you send it to me, it'll get posted, but that just means the council then, doesn't have as much time to review it and would mean they may, defer kind of discussion.
Because this is a draft that incorporates everyone's comments and is a work in progress, that doesn't even have the full public outreach incorporated in. I don't need to see it before it goes to the council for comment. I'm comfortable with recognizing that it's a draft that includes a lot of people's comments and is a work in progress.
I mean, we're going to look at it anyway, Catherine, because we got to put together a
right.
So
we'll look at it eventually, but it's not like, I don't feel like I, as a co-chair, have some like sign off authority separate from this group or elevated above this group of people. And so that's just my thought.
What about this? So if everybody gets stuff to Marion, any comments you have on the spreadsheet, just make sure you put your initials on the file, get it to Marion. She'll look at that, try to put it into one place, and then maybe she can work with Erica. I'm not sure when, but to try to kind of clean it up and, you know, make any final questions about what columns to hide or whatever, and then get the thing done. And Erica and Marion, it's just if you guys have time on Tuesday to do that or not.
I have time late morning Tuesday.
Marion, how about yourself?
Let's see. I have, well, Erica, I'll email you. I have time between 12 and 2. So.
Okay, I can.
So I guess just, yeah, then it means we have to have stuff by the close of business on Monday.
It sounds like Tuesday, it sounds like realistically Tuesday morning at 8. Is that?
Sure. Yeah.
Give people the evening just in case.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or the crack of dawn. Yeah.
Well, will that really work for you? Are we setting you up for awfulness?
I don't know. It's fine.
Try not to say no.
I know we're all strapped. Yeah. Don't look, there's some comments in the spreadsheet that have like an ungodly timestamp on that from last night. So just don't pay attention to those. So I think we'll make it work. We have to get it posted. I think better, as Catherine said, to get the draft up and allow the council time to review it. So we can actually have those conversations at the meeting on the 28th, as opposed to delaying it. I also want to know, I don't think we have quorum anymore.
Uh-oh. Do we
Well, now that you've noted it, now we can't ignore it.
Sorry.
Okay. So now that
what do we have left to cover on our agenda here?
we have maybe a final public comment if you want. I think we've actually covered next steps.
Yeah. So I'll send out an email because there was some comments I wanted to flag, and then deadlines for folks to get stuff back to me.
Thank you, Marion.
And then we'll have to think about what to present, but that can be for the meeting.
We can think about that after we.
Well, I think it'll be fairly, we could take what folks presented last week and just refine those a bit.
Yeah, worry about that on next Friday.
Yep. Okay.
So any public comment? Dale or Cheryl or Marissa?
Porter has comment.
Zach.
Thanks. I just wanted to quickly say how much I appreciate that you all, out of policy maybe, or I don't know what, just practice, seem to allow the public to weigh in the middle of the meeting when a particular topic comes up. It's not how all the subcommittees are doing it, and I just want to note that it is actually a really wonderful way to be able to engage with you all, rather than waiting until the end of a meeting when there's typically very little time left for discussion or whatnot. So thank you so much for allowing that opportunity in the middle of the meeting.
You're welcome, Zach. I will say, as co-chair, I think our work has been improved by the active participation of those who are willing to spend the Friday afternoon with us. So we appreciate your being here.
Any other comments? Oh, we got 6 minutes back.
Ooh.
That's good.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you.
Go forth. Enjoy your weekend. Bye, everybody.
Marion, do you want to stand for 1 second and stop recording?